You know, the big names from World War II, D-Day, Stalingrad, Midway. But what if I told you there was another battle? A battle so crucial, so violent, and so strategically important that without it, the Allies might never have won the war in Europe. Yet almost no one today talks about it. Why? Because its story was buried, sealed, and overshadowed by history's louder moments. This is the forgotten battle that changed the fate of World War II forever. World War II was full of turning points, but this one was different. It wasn't won by the biggest army or the most advanced machines. It was won by exhausted men, freezing in the dark, fighting on land where every step could cost them their life. This is the story of the Battle of the Scheldt, a battle hidden in the shadows of history, but one that changed everything. By late 1944, the Allies had pushed the Germans out of France and Belgium. The world believed victory was just around the corner, but the truth was far more complicated. The Allied armies were advancing so fast they were outrunning their own supply lines. They needed one thing to continue their push into Germany, a major port, a port to bring in fuel, ammunition, food, tanks. They had just captured Antwerp, one of Europe's biggest and most modern ports. It was a massive prize, but there was a huge problem. Antwerp was completely useless, because the entire 80-kilometer waterway leading to it, the Scheldt estuary, was still in German hands. Imagine having the front door to your house, but the enemy controls the only key. Antwerp could change the war, but only if someone could unlock that door. The job was given to a mix of Canadian, British, and Polish forces, supported by the Royal Navy. On paper, it was another objective. In reality, no one expected what came next. The Germans had turned the entire region into a death trap. They flooded vast fields of low-lying polder land, creating a landscape of mud and water. They built hidden concrete bunkers, laid thousands of mines, and positioned snipers and artillery every few hundred meters. This wasn't just a battlefield. It was a maze of mud, water, mines, and unforgiving terrain. One British officer wrote in his diary, "This is not a battlefield, this is a drowning hell." These weren't fresh troops either. Many of the soldiers were veterans of the Normandy campaign. They had lost friends, buried comrades, and had been fighting for months. They had almost nothing left to give, and yet they were sent into one of the hardest and most grueling operations of the entire war. The fighting was brutal and intensely personal. At times, soldiers fought waist-deep in cold, murky water, holding their rifles above their heads while machine gun bullets cut through the surface like rain. It was a slow attritional fight against a well-entrenched and determined enemy. One Canadian soldier remembered, "You couldn't see the enemy, only the flashes of their guns from the dikes. But we knew we had to keep moving forward. Every inch of land, every small canal, every dike costs blood." And still, they kept fighting. While this brutal, silent fight was taking place, history's loudest announcements were happening elsewhere. The liberation of Paris had just been celebrated. The Allied race toward Germany was capturing all the headlines. The world's attention was focused on grand offensives and famous generals. The soldiers at the Scheldt were winning a silent, grinding victory, one the newspapers barely even noticed. And when the battle was finally over, its memory was almost instantly erased by an even bigger event, the German Ardennes offensive, known today as the Battle of the Bulge. The world forgot the Scheldt, but its impact never faded. Perhaps the hardest, most desperate moment of the battle came when Allied forces reached Walcheren Island. This island was the final German stronghold, the cork in the bottle completely blocking access to Antwerp. It was surrounded by water and had been turned into a fortress. So the Allies made a brutal, devastating decision. They bombed the ancient seawalls, the dikes that had protected the island from the North Sea for centuries. They deliberately flooded the entire island, turning the German defenses into isolated pockets, but also turning the battlefield into a watery wasteland. The soldiers who went in next were fighting in knee-deep water, battling not just enemy fire, but rising tides and sinking ground. It was chaotic, unpredictable, and deadly. But it worked. Slowly, painfully, the defenses collapsed, one by one. On November 8, 1944, after 5 weeks of suffering and almost unthinkable bravery, the estuary was finally cleared. Days later, the first Allied ships, loaded with critical supplies, sailed into the port of Antwerp, and for the first time, the Allies had a major supply port close to the front lines. Fuel began flowing to the tanks. Ammunition arrived by the thousands of tons. Trucks, food, and medicine filled the docks. This single victory changed everything. Some historians argue that the Battle of the Bulge, a few weeks later, might have been lost if Antwerp had not been opened just in time to resupply the battered American forces. This forgotten battle quietly ensured the final Allied victory in Western Europe. Yet many of the men who fought there never saw their story told in the history books. They never heard their names read in the documentaries. They never became famous heroes, but their sacrifice in the cold mud and water of the Scheldt shaped the world we live in today. British veterans later said, "We didn't fight for glory. We fought because someone had to do it." Canadian troops who bore the brunt of the fighting often describe the Scheldt as the hardest battle we ever faced. And American historians today admit Without this victory, the war in Europe might have lasted months longer, costing countless more lives. These men changed the course of history, and for decades, almost nobody told their story, until now. Today, when you walk through the peaceful towns and countryside of Belgium and the Netherlands, you pass by the silent ground where those soldiers fought and fell. There's no sound of guns, no smoke, no terror, just calm streets and green fields, because brave men once endured unimaginable suffering to make it possible. The Battle of the Scheldt may be forgotten by many, but its impact will remain forever. Because sometimes, history isn't changed by the famous victories everyone remembers, but by the silent, necessary battles that almost no one does. Thanks for watching. If you want to uncover more of history's hidden stories, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We'll see you in the next one.